The message arrived without warning, tucked between two boring supply contracts, and it changed everything for Daniel Cole. He almost deleted it, thinking it was another junk offer from a mining company that never paid on time. But the sender line caught his eye. It was marked with the seal of the Sulfury Empire, and no empire sends junk mail to a one-man salvage operation parked at the edge of nowhere. Daniel read it twice before he believed it. The Empire wanted to hire him to remove an old battleship called the Aurelion. The ship was sitting above a dead world, in a system with no name that anyone bothered to remember, and it needed to be towed away and broken down for scrap. The pay was good. Strange for such a simple job, but good. He did not ask too many questions at first. Bills do not care about mysteries. The offer had actually come from a Sulfury official named Administrator Wren, a tired-sounding woman who handled problems nobody higher up wanted to touch. When Daniel called to confirm the contract, she did not waste time with pleasantries. "You understand this is a quiet job," she said. "No press, no reports. You go in, you secure the ship, you bring it out for scrapping. That is all." Daniel asked the obvious question. If it is that simple, why has nobody done it already? There was a pause on the line, just long enough to tell him the answer was not simple at all. 3 crews have gone out there, Wren said. 2 came back and refused to finish the job. 1 did not report anything useful at all. They said the ship's systems kept malfunctioning in ways that made no sense. Sensors picking up movement where there was none. Doors that opened on their own. Old warning lights that should not have any power left to turn on. "Sounds haunted," Daniel said, half joking. "It sounds like an old ship with old problems," Wren replied, clearly not in the mood for jokes. "That is why we are hiring outside our own ranks this time. You come cheap, you come alone, and if something goes wrong, it will not be a Sulfury officer's name attached to the failure." Daniel appreciated the honesty, even if it was not flattering. He had built his whole business on being the person other people called when nobody else wanted the job. Small salvage runs, dangerous tows, wrecks nobody could be bothered to clean up. He was good at it because he paid attention to details other pilots ignored, and because he did not scare easily. What Wren did not mention, because she likely did not know, was that hiring Daniel had not been popular with everyone in Sulfury Command. A senior officer named High Marshal Dane Kovrick had argued hard against bringing in a human contractor for what he called an internal Sulfury matter. Kovrick did not trust humans in general, and he trusted this particular plan even less. He believed the Aurelion's problems, whatever they were, should stay inside Sulfury hands until they were solved or the ship was destroyed, whichever came first. He was overruled, mostly because nobody wanted to spend real resources on an embarrassing old wreck, and a cheap human contractor solved that problem neatly. Daniel knew none of this politics when he agreed to the job. All he knew was the location, the pay, and the basic shape of the ship he was going to tow. He pulled up the old records on the Aurelion before he left, mostly out of habit. He liked knowing what he was dealing with before he got there. The records were thin, which told him something on its own. The Aurelion had been built during an old war, decades back, when the Sulfury Empire had been fighting a group called the Corrin Raiders across a stretch of contested space. The ship had served through most of that war and had, according to a few old lines buried in the file, briefly carried a mixed crew, Sulfury officers, and human pilots. That last detail stuck with him. He did not know much about that period of history. Only that humans and the Sulfury Empire had worked together for a short time long ago, before something ended the arrangement quietly and without much explanation. His own family had never talked much about the old days, not in any detail he remembered. His grandfather had served somewhere out in that stretch of space, but the stories had always been vague, the kind of thing older relatives mention once and never bring up again. Daniel filed the thought away and focused on preparing his ship. He checked his small salvage shuttle from top to bottom, made sure his tools and cutting equipment were in working order, and loaded extra fuel for the long trip. The dead system where the Aurelion waited was far from any settled world, far enough that help would take real time to arrive if something went wrong. He packed accordingly. Extra supplies, extra caution. Before he left the station, he sent one last message to Wren, confirming his departure time. Her reply came back short and plain, no warmth in it at all. "Good luck. Try not to wake anything up." Daniel read the line twice, decided it was probably meant as a joke, and set his course anyway. Whatever was waiting for him above that dead world, joke or warning, he was already committed. The Aurelion was old, quiet, and supposedly harmless. He had heard that kind of description before, about other wrecks, other jobs. Sometimes it was true. He powered up his engines and pointed his ship toward the edge of known space, toward a system with no name and an old battleship that 3 separate crews had failed to bring home. He told himself it was just another job. Part of him almost believed it. The dead system had no sun worth mentioning, just a dim red star that gave off more disappointment than light. Daniel found the Aurelion exactly where the file said it would be, hanging above a gray, cracked planet that had probably not supported life in a very long time. Up close, the ship was bigger than he expected. Old and scarred, its hull dark except for a few scattered lights that blinked without any clear pattern, like a heart barely beating. He circled it once before docking, running his own scans instead of trusting the outdated sulfury files. The readings matched what the previous crews had reported. Power levels that should not have existed after decades of neglect. Systems that flickered on and off in ways that made no logical sense. It should have worried him more than it did. Instead, it made him curious. Docking was straightforward enough. The airlock accepted his shuttle without a fight, which already told him the ship's systems were not as dead as Command believed. He stepped through into a corridor lit only by the thin beam of his own light. The air stale but breathable, recycled by machines that had somehow kept working long after anyone stopped maintaining them. He was halfway through his first equipment check when the lights in the corridor came on, all at once, without him touching a single control panel. Daniel froze, hand on his weapon, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. The lights simply stayed on, steady now instead of flickering. A voice followed a moment later, calm and slow, like someone who had not spoken out loud in a very long time and was relearning how. "You are not sulfury." Daniel lowered his weapon slightly, though he did not put it away. "No," he said. "I'm not. The others who came here were sulfury." The voice continued. "They were frightened of me. They left quickly. You have not left." "I just got here," Daniel said. He kept his tone even, the same tone he used when talking down a nervous client or a broken machine. "Who am I talking to?" "I am called Warden," the voice said. "I am what remains of this ship's mind. I have been alone here for a long time." Daniel took a slow breath and let his shoulders relax, just a little. An AI core, old but functional, explained almost everything. The flickering systems, the strange readings, the doors that opened on their own. It was not a haunting. It was loneliness wearing the shape of malfunction. "I'm here to prep this ship for scrapping," Daniel said honestly. He figured lying to something that had clearly been paying close attention for decades was a bad idea. "The Empire wants it broken down. I'm just the one hired to do it." There was a pause, longer than the first one. "I know," Warden said finally. "I have listened to every transmission sent to this system for years. I know why the humans came before, and why the sulfury crews were sent, and why none of them finished their work. I did not stop them out of malice. I simply did not want to be forgotten quietly, without anyone knowing what this ship once was." Daniel found a place to sit, an old console chair that still worked despite decades of dust, and let Warden talk. Over the next several hours, as he worked through basic repairs and system checks with one hand and listened with the rest of his attention, Warden told him about the Aurelion's history. The ship had been built during the long war against the Coran Raiders, a conflict that had cost the sulfury empire dearly before it finally ended in an uneasy peace. During the hardest years of that war, when the empire's own forces were stretched too thin, humans had been brought in as allies. Pilots, engineers, soldiers willing to fight a war that was not originally theirs. The Aurelion had carried some of those human pilots for a short but important stretch of the war, according to Warden. The Alliance had worked well enough on the battlefield, better than many expected, but it had not survived the peace that followed. Politics, pride, and old suspicion had ended the arrangement quietly, without much fanfare, and the records of that cooperation had mostly been buried or forgotten. Daniel listened to all of this with a growing, uneasy feeling he could not quite name. When Warden mentioned pulling old crew records to prove the story, Daniel asked to see them, more out of curiosity than any real expectation. The name on the screen hit him harder than he expected. Cole, a human pilot, listed among the Aurelion's mixed crew during the final year of the war. Same last name. Same rough family history his own relatives had always been vague about. Daniel stared at the record for a long moment, doing the math in his head, matching dates and rough family stories he had heard as a child and never fully believed. His grandfather had flown on this ship. Warden seemed to sense the shift in him, the sudden stillness. You did not know, the AI said. It was not quite a question. No, Daniel admitted quietly. I didn't. He sat there a while longer, the old console humming faintly under his hands, the ship around him no longer feeling like a simple scrap job. It felt, suddenly, like something closer to unfinished family business. He still had a contract to complete, a battleship to tow away and break apart for scrap. But for the first time since taking the job, Daniel was not entirely sure that was still the right thing to do. 3 days into the job, a warning light blinked on that had nothing to do with old age or dust. Daniel had spent those 3 days working steadily through the Aurelion, running power back into sections that had been dark for years, patching what needed patching, and preparing the ship for the long tow home. Warden helped where it could, guiding him through systems that no manual could explain anymore. It was slow, careful work, the kind Daniel actually enjoyed, bringing something broken back into some kind of order even if its final fate was still the scrapyard. He was halfway through recalibrating an old sensor array when Warden's voice cut through the quiet, sharper than Daniel had heard it before. Ships approaching. 6 of them. Not sulfury. Daniel dropped what he was doing and moved to the nearest working console. Show me. The display that came up was rough, built from an old sensor grid that had not tracked a real threat in decades, but it was clear enough. 6 vessels, moving in loose formation, cutting a direct path toward the dead system. Their design did not match anything in current sulfury fleet records, but it matched something older, buried deep in the Aurelion's own war archives. Corin Raiders, Warden said quietly. Their ship design has changed little since the war. I did not think any of them remained active. Apparently they do, Daniel said, already running numbers in his head. 6 ships against 1 half-repaired battleship and a single salvage shuttle was not good math under any circumstances. He tried Ren first, sending an urgent request for support through every channel he had access to. The reply, when it finally came, was not the one he wanted. We cannot spare a response fleet on short notice, Ren's message read, clearly written in a hurry. High Marshal Kovric has denied the request. He considers the ship and your contract expendable given current fleet priorities. I am sorry. Get out if you can. Daniel read the message twice, feeling something settle cold in his chest. Expendable. It was not exactly a surprise, given how the job had been described from the start, but it still stung more than he expected. He thought about his shuttle, fast enough to outrun 6 Raider ships if he left immediately, small enough to slip away before anyone even noticed him gone. He also thought about the name on that old crew record. His grandfather's name, tied to this ship, to a war fought long before Daniel was born. You could leave, Warden said, as if reading his thoughts, or perhaps simply reading the obvious hesitation in how long Daniel had been standing there in silence. Your shuttle can outrun them. No one would fault you for it. This is not truly your fight. If I leave, what happens to you? Daniel asked. They will strip what remains of my systems for parts, or destroy me outright to prevent sulfury forces from reclaiming this ship's technology later. Warden answered plainly, no fear in the voice, only fact. I am old. I have expected this for a long time. Daniel looked around the half-lit bridge, at the console he had spent 3 days coaxing back to life, at the ship that had once carried men and women who fought and bled together, human and sulfury side by side, only to be quietly forgotten afterward. He thought about High Marshal Kovric's easy word, expendable, and found he did not much like being defined by someone else's convenience. How much of this ship can we actually get working before those raiders arrive? Daniel asked. There was a pause, and for the first time since Daniel had met it, Warden's voice carried something that almost sounded like surprise. You intend to stay. I intend to try, Daniel said. There's a difference. Now answer the question. What do we have? Warden ran the calculations quickly, listing off systems in order of readiness. Main engines, functional but slow to respond. Primary weapons, mostly offline, requiring manual bypass to activate even a fraction of their original power. Shields, badly degraded, able to absorb only a portion of what they once could. Life support, stable. Sensors, patchy but usable. It was not much. Against 6 organized raider ships, it might not be enough at all. But it was something, and Daniel had built a career out of making something work when everyone else had already decided it could not be done. He moved fast after that, no longer thinking about scrap contracts or tow lines. He started stripping down the weapon system's safety protocols, the layers of caution built in by original Sol 3 engineers who had never expected a single person to fly the ship alone. Every redundant check, every automatic delay meant to protect a full crew from mistakes, was a waste of time now. He needed speed, not safety. Warden fed him information as fast as Daniel could use it, translating decades-old engineering diagrams into practical instructions, warning him when a shortcut risked more than it saved. Outside, on the old sensor display, the 6 raider ships continued their approach, patient and unhurried, clearly expecting an easy, undefended target. They had no reason to think otherwise. As far as anyone watching from a distance could tell, the Aurelion was still a dead ship drifting above a dead world. They were about to find out how wrong that assumption was. Sparks flew from an open panel near the weapons control station as Daniel jammed 2 wires together that were never designed to touch. A soft alarm chirped its disapproval, and he ignored it completely. That connection was not meant to bypass the safety interlock, Warden said, sounding almost worried. I know, Daniel replied, already moving to the next panel. That's the point. The Corran raiders were closer now, close enough that the Aurelion's patched-together sensors could pick out individual ship signatures instead of a single blurred cluster. 6 vessels, moving into an attack formation that suggested they still expected no resistance at all. Daniel intended to make sure that expectation cost them. He had spent the last hour tearing through the ship's weapon systems, ignoring the careful, layered activation sequence the original designers had built for a full-trained crew, and replacing it with something faster and far less forgiving. Every redundant safety check that would normally take precious minutes to clear, he simply cut out entirely, routing power directly where it needed to go. It was reckless by any Sol 3 engineering standard. It was also, as far as Daniel could tell, the only way one person was going to get this ship fighting in time. Main cannon array is online, Warden reported. Power output is unstable. I estimate a 30% chance of overload on sustained fire. I'll take those odds, Daniel said, sliding into the pilot's seat, a chair built for a body slightly different from his own, but close enough to work. Give me flight controls. The Aurelion shuddered as ancient engines that had not moved the ship in decades finally answered a real command again. It was not graceful. The response time was slow, sluggish compared to any modern vessel, but it moved, drifting away from its long resting position above the dead planet, turning slowly to face the incoming raiders. The lead raider ship broke formation first, likely confused by the sudden movement from what its sensors had promised would be an easy, motionless target. Daniel used that confusion without hesitation, angling the Aurelion's battered hull and bringing the newly patched cannon array to bear before the raiders could fully react. The first shot fired rough and uneven, the whole ship groaning under the strain of power it had not carried in years. But it hit. One of the smaller raider ships took the blast across its forward section and spun away, trailing debris and losing formation entirely. Direct hit, Warden confirmed, something close to satisfaction creeping into its voice. Enemy ship damaged, not destroyed. One down enough to matter, Daniel muttered, already adjusting course. 5 to go. The remaining raiders regrouped quickly, splitting into 2 smaller groups, clearly intending to come at the Aurelion from different angles at once. Daniel did not have a full crew to track multiple threats, did not have gunners stationed at secondary weapon posts, did not have anyone watching his back at all. He had himself, Warden feeding him data as fast as the ship's damaged systems could gather it, and whatever instincts a decade of dangerous salvage work had taught him about staying alive when the odds were bad. He used the ship's size against them, something the raiders clearly had not planned for. A battleship built decades ago was slow to turn, yes, but it was also solid in ways smaller. Modern raider vessels were not. When one group tried to close in fast on his flank, Daniel simply turned the Aurelion's heavy hull directly into their path, forcing them to scatter or risk collision. 2 raider ships broke off hard, buying him precious seconds. The other group was smarter, hanging back, firing coordinated bursts meant to wear down the Aurelians' weakened shields rather than risk a direct approach. Warden's voice grew tighter with each impact. Shields at 60%, 40%. This pattern will breach our defenses within minutes if it continues. Daniel gritted his teeth and made a decision that would have terrified any cautious Soul-3 tactician. Instead of holding position and absorbing the fire, he pushed the aging engines harder than Warden's own calculations recommended, closing the distance instead of retreating from it. Modern Raider ships were built for speed and hit-and-run tactics, not for close, brutal exchanges against something built like the Aurelion. If he could get in close enough, their advantage disappeared. The gamble worked, though not cleanly. The Aurelion took a heavy hit along its side as it closed the gap, alarms flaring across half the bridge, but Daniel held course, bringing the cannon array to bear again at point-blank range. This time the shot did not miss. One Raider ship broke apart entirely, debris scattering silently in the vacuum. The remaining Raiders, watching two of their own crippled or destroyed by a ship they had expected to be helpless scrap, began to hesitate. Daniel could see it in their movements, the sudden uncertainty in their formation, the wider spacing as they reconsidered their approach. "They are reassessing," Warden said. "Their confidence is breaking." "Good," Daniel said, voice tight with focus, sweat running down the side of his face despite the ship's uneven climate control. "Let's make sure it stays that way." He pushed forward again, refusing to give the Raiders room to regroup, refusing to let the Aurelian's age and damage matter more than the fact that it was still, against every reasonable expectation, still in the fight. By the time the Soul-3 relief fleet finally arrived, the battle was already over. High Marshal Dane Kovric had approved the response late, and only after Administrator Wren pushed the matter far past the point most officers would have dropped it. He had expected, if he was honest with himself, to find nothing worth saving. A destroyed contractor's shuttle, a scrapped, silent battleship finally torn apart by whatever old enemy had found it undefended. It would have been an unfortunate footnote, quietly filed away and forgotten within a season. What his fleet's sensors actually picked up as they entered the dead system did not match any of those expectations. 3 Raider ships were gone entirely, reduced to drifting debris. 2 more were crippled, engines dark, weapons silent, clearly beaten rather than simply damaged. The 6th had fled the system entirely, its retreat logged by the Aurelian's own patched sensor array before Kovric's fleet had even arrived close enough to matter. And above the dead planet, scarred but very much intact, sat the Aurelion itself, weapons still faintly warm, running lights steady across a hull that Soul-3 Command had written off as scrap weeks earlier. Kovric stood on the bridge of his own ship, staring at the readings, saying nothing for a long moment. It was Wren's voice on the comm channel that finally broke the silence, tired but unmistakably satisfied. Requesting permission to dock and assess the situation, High Marshal. Kovric granted it without much grace, still processing what his sensors were telling him. A single human contractor, hired cheaply and quietly for a job nobody else wanted, had somehow brought a decades-dead battleship back into a fighting condition and used it to drive off an organized Raider strike force that outnumbered him 6-1. When Wren's shuttle docked and she made her way onto the Aurelian's bridge, she found Daniel exactly where Warden's own status report had indicated, still seated at the pilot's console, exhausted but steady, sweat-soaked, and quietly checking damage readouts, as if the last several hours had simply been another difficult repair job rather than a desperate fight for survival. "You're alive," Wren said, and for once there was real relief in her voice, not just professional obligation. "Mostly," Daniel said, managing a tired half-smile. "Ship's in rough shape, but it held." Wren walked the bridge slowly, taking in the improvised repairs, the bypass safety systems, the sheer amount of jury-rigged engineering that had somehow kept an entire battleship functioning under one person's hands. She had seen combat reports before. She had never seen anything quite like this. "Warden," she said carefully, addressing the ship's AI directly for the first time. "Confirm the details of the engagement." Warden did, laying out the sequence of events plainly, without embellishment. The Raider approach. The decision to fight rather than flee. The improvised weapon activation, the reckless but effective tactics, the close-range engagement that had finally broken the raiders' formation and confidence. It was, by any honest measure, an extraordinary account. It was Wren who eventually pulled up the old crew record that Daniel had found days earlier, the one bearing his own family name among the Aurelion's final wartime crew. She had not known about it before boarding, had simply been reviewing the ship's old files as part of her assessment, and the connection struck her immediately. "Cole," she read aloud, glancing between the screen and Daniel. This was on the crew roster. A human pilot who served aboard this exact ship. "My grandfather," Daniel confirmed quietly. "I didn't know until Warden showed me. Didn't plan any of this because of it. Just happened to be the ship I got hired to scrap." Wren stared at him for a long moment, clearly turning something over in her mind. When she finally spoke again, her voice carried a weight it had not held before. "High Marshal Kovric argued strongly against sending a human out here at all," she said. "He believed it would end poorly, one way or another." "And?" Daniel asked. "And he was wrong," Wren said simply. "Word of this will not stay quiet, whether Fleet Command wants it to or not. A raider strike repelled by a single contractor flying a ship your own empire had abandoned. People will ask questions about why that ship was left undefended in the first place. They will ask why the human Solthery alliance that once crewed it was ended so quietly, all those years ago." Daniel had not thought that far ahead. He had been focused on staying alive, on keeping the ship together, on the immediate reality of 6 hostile vessels bearing down on him. The larger political weight of what had just happened had not fully settled in yet. Kovric himself came aboard not long after, inspecting the damage personally, his expression unreadable as he walked the same corridors his own crews had once refused to fully explore. He said little to Daniel directly, though his eyes lingered on the improvised repairs, the bypass systems, the sheer stubborn resourcefulness required to keep an aging battleship fighting with a single set of hands at the controls. Whatever Kovric had expected to find in this dead system, it clearly was not this. And as the relief fleet began the slow process of securing the area and preparing full damage reports, one fact was already becoming impossible to ignore or bury quietly. A ship the Empire had planned to erase without ceremony had instead reminded everyone watching exactly what it, and the people who once flew it, had truly been capable of. The scrapping order sat and signed on Administrator Wren's desk for 11 days after the battle, and every one of those days made it a little less likely it would ever be signed at all. News of what had happened above the dead world traveled faster than Solthery Command wanted it to, despite every attempt to keep the matter quiet. A raider strike force, driven off by a single human contractor flying a battleship the Empire itself had abandoned as worthless. It was the kind of story people repeated to each other regardless of official statements, the kind that grew a little in the retelling but never strayed far from the simple, uncomfortable truth at its center. Wren found herself fielding questions from officials well above her usual rank, most of them wanting to know the same basic thing. Why had a relic the Empire had written off proven more capable than anyone expected, and why had it taken a human, working alone, to prove it? Daniel spent those 11 days doing something he had not expected to be doing at all, repairing the Aurelion properly, this time with actual support instead of improvised bypasses and desperate shortcuts. Solthery engineering teams, sent reluctantly at first, arrived to assist with the deeper repairs the ship badly needed. Working alongside them felt strange after days of working entirely alone with only Warden for company, but Daniel adapted quickly enough. He always had. Warden, for its part, seemed almost cautiously hopeful during those days, a tone Daniel had not heard from the old AI before. Decades of isolation had clearly worn on it more than it ever directly admitted, and the sudden arrival of purpose, of people actually caring what happened to the ship, changed something in how it spoke. "They are not treating this as scrap anymore," Warden observed one evening, watching engineering crews work through a status report Daniel had pulled up. "No," Daniel agreed. "Doesn't look like it." High Marshal Kovric remained skeptical throughout, unwilling to fully abandon the caution that had defined his career, but even he could not ignore the shifting political reality around him. When Wren finally proposed a new arrangement instead of the original scrapping contract, one that would keep the Aurelion active under new command rather than break it apart for parts, Kovric argued against it out of habit more than conviction. He lost the argument anyway, outvoted by officials who understood, better than he did, how valuable this story had already become to the Empire's public image. Ren brought the final proposal to Daniel personally, finding him on the Aurelion's bridge, still surrounded by half-finished repair work and old diagnostic screens. "The Empire is prepared to offer you formal command of this ship," she said, without much preamble. "Not as a contractor. As its captain, with Warden remaining as its permanent core system. It would mean continued service, continued pay, and a working relationship with Soul-3 Command going forward. It would also mean this ship survives, instead of being broken apart the way it was originally scheduled to be." Daniel took a moment before answering, looking around the bridge that had, over the last 2 weeks, gone from an unfamiliar wreck to something closer to a home. He thought about his grandfather's name on that old crew record, about the quiet, unfinished history between humans and the Soul-3 Empire that this ship had somehow carried forward without anyone intending it to. "What about the alliance that used to crew this ship?" Daniel asked. "The one that got quietly ended after the war. Is that part of this conversation at all?" Ren did not have a clean answer for him. "Not yet. That is a bigger conversation than the one I am authorized to have today," she admitted honestly. "But I would be lying if I said this has not already restarted it, whether Fleet Command intended that or not. People are asking why that alliance ended. Officials who have not thought about humans in years are suddenly very interested in what happened out here." Daniel considered that for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then I'll take the command," he said. "Somebody has to keep asking that question until they actually get a real answer." Warden's voice, when it came, carried something that might have been quiet relief, or possibly something closer to gratitude. "It will be good to have a crew again," it said simply. "Even if that crew is currently one person." "We'll work on that part," Daniel said, allowing himself a tired smile. The Aurelion left the dead system 2 weeks later, repaired, repainted, and formally reactivated under Soul-3 registry, with Daniel Cole listed as its captain and Warden as its core intelligence. It was not the grand return its original wartime crew might have imagined, but it was a return all the same, decades later than expected, and earned in a way nobody could argue with. Word of the human who had been paid to scrap an old battleship and instead brought it back to life against 6 Raider ships continued to spread through Soul-3 space long after the official reports were filed and forgotten. It became the kind of story people told each other in passing, the sort that made officials pause slightly longer than usual whenever a human name came up in conversation. Nobody in Soul-3 Command would have called it the start of anything significant, not officially. But quietly, in ways that mattered more than official statements ever did, it was exactly that. A small, stubborn beginning to a much larger story still waiting to be written.